Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Angelique and I'm from Oregon. My Bigfoot encounter happened in 2014 when I was 31 years old. I consider myself to be incredibly privileged and blessed because I grew up and still reside in an exquisite home that is perched on a rocky elevation that overlooks the Oregon coast and is literally 100 yards or so from a private beach with clouds of white sea sand and extraordinary sculpture-looking rocky outcrops, not to mention exquisite blue ocean with those foaming white waves that crash majestically against the rocks. Growing up, I adored the sounds of the tumultuous waves as they rose up in the distance, forming elevated hills of moving water that propelled themselves ever forwards until they flattened out into soft white foamy waves, until finally, with one last forward shiftful motion, the gentle water would glide across the sea sand, leaving behind pretty semicircular white frills, the indelible evidence of the footprint of a wave. I enjoyed the continued splashing motion of this interminable body of exquisite salty water. It was always the reassuring, steady background sound to our daily rituals. I found it enormously conciliatory and relaxing, and I also loved the taste and smell of the salty air and the feel of the cooling sea breeze blowing against my face. I loved nothing more than taking my 2 Irish wolfhounds, Lacey and Big Bear, for their daily run across the beach, and my dogs adored paddling in the water there and racing across the sea sand catching balls. I just couldn't envisage or imagine another life, because living by the ocean means the entire world to me. Our house had a look of the old and new married together to create a really delightful, sumptuous dwelling. It was designed by an up-and-coming architect that truly appreciated the beauty of historic architecture, but at the same time loved the advantages of modern contemporary designs. So he used this to maximise the panoramic ocean views of our home by introducing large seamless glass windows throughout, while at the same time ensuring that our home reflected the quintessential character so typically seen in older homes. I would describe our whitewashed house as a perfectly symmetrical home, with 3 stories, a grey slate roof, and symmetrical sliding windows and balconies on the higher elevations, while on the lower elevation or ground floor we have a very spacious, luxurious entertainment area with state-of-the-art barbecue equipment, including a stunning pizza oven, as both my parents are passionate cooks and are both in the hotel business. Our garden is filled with ubiquitous trees, such as the statuesque, rather imposing Port Oxford cedar, red alders, spruce and ash trees, and it has all kinds of ornamental grasses on display, not to mention some hardy, colourful roses and pots of beautiful flowering geraniums in bright pinks and reds that add that quintessential colour and beauty to our outdoor space. My peculiar story begins when I was working for a local budding and very promising up-and-coming company in Oregon for an amazing state-of-the-art, rather zooty product line, which was being launched by our sales team. Some of our sales could be negotiated from the office over the phone via internet communication, or we could consult with clients at our glamorous offices on site, or then there were occasions we would travel to visit potential clients all over North America to promote and sell our products. Our sales team consisted of 30 staff members and, of course, our boss, who was a man called Hugh Evans. Now, Hugh Evans had only just procured the job as manager of our large sales team from his dad, who had handed down the reins of the business to his trust and care. The trouble with Hugh was he was incredibly young and immature, and he was taking charge of a team of skilled sales staff, easily 15 years his senior. Now, don't get me wrong, I haven't got any prejudice against young people taking charge if they are professional in their endeavours, but Hugh Evans was anything but. I remember he hired a young, pretty girl in our offices whom had no experience whatsoever in sales and literally didn't know a thing about how to string 2 words together when talking to our potential clients. But that wasn't significant at all to Hugh, as he had other ideas in mind as far as she was concerned. Before long, Hugh was engaging in a drawn-out love affair with the young girl in question, all under our noses. I cannot tell you the number of times I literally entered his office to have a word with him about something very important. I kid you not, there were women's clothes and undergarments strewn over the entire floor like a messy bedroom. As I sat down to talk to Hugh, he would be snorting as he tried to suppress his laughter, and his silly girlfriend would be giggling in the corner of the office, hiding behind the flower pot in a state of undress, almost as if she didn't know I knew she was there. It was very hard to respect a boss who engaged in such blatantly derogatory behaviour in front of his own staff. The men working on our sales team in our office found Hugh's conduct very objectionable, offensive and exceedingly embarrassing, especially when dealing with personal clients who visited our offices regularly. The last thing we wanted was our clients to see our offices turned into Hugh's love interest's boudoir. "His father needs to know that his son is behaving like a Casanova," said Herbert. He was one of the salesmen in our team. "It's ridiculous, this kind of shenanigans going on during work hours. Such behaviour is hurting to our business and costing our sales big time. I have a young family to raise, and I can't afford to lose out on sales because of that selfish sod," he explained. Another thing I despised about Hugh's arrogant behaviour was the way he would cross his long legs out onto the gleaming oak desk in his grandiose office, even while he saw important clients. It really was repugnant and unacceptable behaviour for an up-and-coming sales executive. I'm pretty certain we lost customers due to his superior attitude that he continuously exhibited. One day Hugh offered our sales team an amazing sales incentive, which is often the case in a company where you're dealing with a team of ambitious salespeople that are eager to make excellent commissions. The big prize was a trip to Paris for two, to a very exclusive hotel, with all expenses paid and some spending money to boot. The prize would be attained by the salesperson that was acquiring the most sales and the highest sales figures by the end of the year. Everyone in our team was incredibly eager to win this prize, and no one more so than myself. I was utterly determined to win, and so much so that I worked harder than anybody else in the entire team. I went out of my way to visit clients, even if they were locally based, because I simply didn't want to lose sales as a result of Hugh's inappropriate behaviour in the offices. I also travelled all over North America, staying in different locations in order to acquire sales, and I communicated with people efficiently online and regularly even sold our products over the telephone. By the end of the year, I had reaped significantly more sales than the rest of our entire team, and it was only a matter of formality before I was finally presented with the prize to Paris that would be given to me at the office Christmas party, which was the usual custom. All my sales friends were so complimentary and genuinely thrilled that I had actually won, because they were such decent people who delighted in each other's successes. The Christmas party was being hosted, as was customary at the time, at a very smart formal venue. This snazzy, idyllic location was also situated on its own stunning private beach, and was a grandiose, large white Georgian-style house with plenty of formal bedroom suites, including a personalised chef on hand, beauty salon, and every other conceivable luxury that you could envisage for a weekend retreat. I was incredibly excited and enthused that night, as I dressed in a classic, stylish black velvety dress with a silvery diamante trim. I visited the in-house salon to have my hair and nails done to perfection for the dinner and, naturally, the prize-winning presentation later on that night. I could barely wait, and all day my nerves were on edge as I contemplated the spectacular moment when Hugh would present me with my prize. I could barely wait. I cannot remember a time in my life when I was more enlivened with a feverish sense of excitement that was causing me to experience these butterflies flapping around in my stomach with a nervous energy. I had never won anything in my entire life before, and although I knew I deserved the prize, it was so wonderful knowing that I was going to be a winner tonight. I could envisage my trip to Paris with my boyfriend Marcus and the incredible romantic time we would inevitably have together, visiting the Eiffel Tower, the Arc de Triomphe, Notre Dame Cathedral, and so much more. I was so enthusiastic that I could barely eat the several courses of gourmet food that was being presented before me, but instead I fiddled with my knife and fork, barely eating a thing. "I can see you're excited," said my friend Tessa, squeezing my hand tightly. "But you deserve the prize, my girl. No one has worked harder than you have this year." "Thanks, Tess," I said. "That means a lot." Before long the prize-giving began, and I was shaking uncontrollably with excitement as Hugh raised a glass of bubbling champagne to toast absolutely everyone. "First, I want to raise a glass to the entire sales team and congratulate you all for an astounding good sales performance this year. And it's all thanks to your hard work, diligence and dedication that has moved our company forward with such phenomenal success and growth in sales. So well done to each and every one of you." Everyone began to clap and cheer and whistle and click their glasses together while sipping champagne. "Now I'm going to present the prize to the most inspirational salesperson of the year, which is the trip to Paris for two, with all expenses paid." At that moment my heart was in my mouth and I could barely breathe. This was the moment that I'd been waiting for all year, and finally it had arrived. All eyes were on me as Hugh announced the winner for the prize, and imagine my shock when he called out his own girlfriend's name. "Anna Maryland, would you come up here, please, to receive your prize?" I watched in horror as the giddy young girl giggled as she received the large bouquet of flowers, bottle of French champagne, and the air tickets to Paris that Hugh handed over to her. There was a stunned, awkward silence among all the salespeople as the beaming young girl took her prize gladly. All the sales team looked at each other in horrified awe. Surely this was a joke. In that moment I cannot describe how mortified I felt. It was like I'd been hit hard in the guts by a massive forklift truck, and that my whole being had been obliterated by the devastating collision, or in my case the extreme shock of these startling revelations that literally knocked my joy and hope away in a single blast. Could this really be happening to me? None of this was at all fair. It was exceedingly wrong. I staggered away from the table like a drunk, feeling the rising nausea welling up in my throat, and I knew I was going to be violently sick. I ran away towards the private beach, because being close to nature was my greatest source of comfort, and I knew being close to the crashing waves would invariably bring me the peace that I needed right now. Before long I was standing on the private beach and throwing up in a rocky alcove where the seawater washed over my feet with a gentle coolness. For a long while I hurled my guts out until my stomach ached from the physical exertion of trying to throw up on an empty stomach. For a while I paddled in the soft water, staring at the pretty foaming bubbles that caressed my feet gently, and enjoying the crashing sounds of the breakers thundering against the rocks. It was an exquisitely beautiful night, illuminated by a full bright moon and a scattering of silvery stars, and the outside lights from the venue's prestigious palatial-looking mansion only added to the intrigue. In the distance I could hear the sound of the DJ's drumming music, together with the excited, chattering, laughing voices and clinking of glasses and cutlery from all the outside glamorous decked tables. I sat silently on the beach alone, just staring at the ocean. For a long time I felt emotionally numb, as I reflected on all the weekends that I'd given up in order to win this incredible prize. Now it had been handed over to a silly girl who barely had made a single sale on her own, and she'd been given the prize as the most inspirational salesperson. It was an absolute joke if ever I saw one, and no prizes for guessing who would be benefiting from this trip. Hugh himself. Suddenly all the emotions overcame me and bubbled to the surface, rising and overflowing like a river that finally breaks its banks, as I began to sob and sob and sob. I didn't know that I was capable of spilling so many tears. The next thing I knew was that someone was throwing little pebbles at me, and I looked up to see a huge creature standing only yards away from me, and I realized almost at once that this was the mythical Bigfoot. I was so stunned that my tears instantly dried up. I kid you not, that this critter was standing so close to me that I could have almost reached out to touch him with my hands. The strange, rather curious creature began to copy my crying by making all these sobbing movements that I had just exhibited, and he started wiping his tears with his forearm like I'd been wiping away my tears. His imitation of me was so incredibly hilarious that I began to laugh out loud. The creature enjoyed my response to his reenactment of me, that he promptly mimicked me all over again. But this time I was laughing so hysterically that it began to hurt my stomach muscles. The Bigfoot then started to copy my laughter, and by now I could not keep the bright smile off my face. This Bigfoot was a natural comedian, and he knew it. I kept wondering why this elusive, normally evasive creature was standing so incredibly close to me, and was so congenial and warm in his manner. I had listened to stories about Bigfoots before, and people appeared to have had some rather harrowing, dangerous encounters that had left them terrified by the creature. Others had searched for the elusive beast, and yet despite all their best efforts had failed to even gain an encounter. Here I was alone on a beach, and Bigfoot had approached me on his own terms. He had reached out to comfort me in a moment when my world had come crashing down upon me like a tsunami of grief. He had rescued me from my tears and put a smile on my face. Had he detected my grief, and had the humanity in him overcome his shyful reticence, and had he chosen to reach out to me at such a poignant time as this? I was certain that this was the case. I am now utterly convinced that Bigfoots can read human energy like books, and they're clearly creatures with compassion and extreme kindness when needed. The creature sat down yards away from me, as if we were both firm friends, and we sat there watching the coast. I got the sense that this critter came down to the beach regularly to view the ocean waves, and it was exquisitely beautiful, sitting so close to such a majestic, extraordinary creature, as if it was the most natural thing to do in the world. The Bigfoot was covered with long, flowing, exquisite-looking auburn hair, and was about 7 foot tall, 3 feet wide, and possibly 700 pounds. The creature was exceedingly large and burly, with very powerful-looking muscles and gigantic shoulders. I noticed it had incredibly long arms, often typically seen in the primate species, with extensively huge hands and feet. It had the typical cone-shaped head they often talk about when they describe Bigfoots, and a very long angular face with a prominent, deeply furrowed brow ridge and very deep-set dark eyes that were so kind and compassionate. The critter got up and waded into the water, trying to encourage me with his body language to follow him in. I shook my head, which he seemed to understand, but I watched him swim with the ease of a dolphin. He loved going into the deeper parts of the ocean and tackling those large waves, and he was so agile he'd have made a surfer look clumsy. He came out of the water and looked at me intently with bright golden eyes, and I watched him shake his shaggy coat of hair, spraying me with lots of water. I laughed and giggled as he showered me with the fine spray from his wet coat. For a second the creature disappeared, and the next thing I knew was he presented me with a very large, beautiful seashell that he'd found, and demonstrated to me that you could listen to the sound of the ocean from the shell by attaching it to your ear. Once the Bigfoot had gifted me with the shell, he nodded in my direction and glided away with an incredible grace. I was so sad to see him go. For a moment I sat there in a stunned stupor. Had that really just transpired, I wondered? Had I really encountered the mythical beast they called Bigfoot? I could hardly believe the incredulous thing that had just happened, and in that instant I realised that this incredible encounter with the elusive beast was so much more preferable than any trip to Paris could ever have been. Fast forward a week or so, and I was to discover to my absolute horror that Hugh had actually been sacked from the sales company by his own dad, and his girlfriend had subsequently also lost her job. I was to discover that several of my own sales team had visited Hugh's father spontaneously because they were so aggrieved that I had not received the prize to Paris. They informed Hugh's father about his son's abominable behaviour at work, and his father had been mortified about his son's lack of professionalism. I could not believe that my work colleagues had literally stuck their necks on the line for me with such a courageous, self-sacrificing act, because the father could have easily defended his son and sacked the sales team, but that never actually transpired. Instead, the father organised a surprise party for me, and I was finally presented with my prize to Paris after all that. To cut a long story short, I gather Hugh's father persuaded Hugh to enter the military, as he believed his son needed some knocking into shape and gaining some much-needed boundaries in his life, which wasn't a bad thing. I'm glad to inform you that my trip to Paris was a magical experience, but nothing was more memorable to me than my encounter with the hairy man. So there you are. That's my story. I just want to thank you for that incredible, incredible story. Wow, what a beautiful way to meet Bigfoot. On the beach, on his own terms. Until next time, goodbye and good night.